Hello everyone and welcome back to Chapter by Chapter. Today we're going to be discussing Chapter 8, which is another Nina chapter, and I probably shouldn't have worn all of this makeup today because this one gets pretty emotional. This chapter starts out with Nina and Audric on their way to bury Matthias. As they're walking, Nina starts to realize that it was actually the dead that brought them to this town in the first place. And she knows this because as they're walking farther and farther away from the town, the voices just keep growing louder and louder and louder. They're protesting, telling her basically to go back. And this experience is leaving her pretty shaken, and it's why she hasn't even told Audric or Leonie about the graves that she found. So besides, the
voices of the dead
in Nina's head, she actually starts a conversation with a living person. Her and Audric start to talk about how obviously him and Leonie have a crush on each other, and it is in fact very mutual. Once he's not her commander anymore, he should kind of, move in on that. Through this conversation, Zoya's actually brought up. It's mentioned that everyone is always in love with her and enamored with her beauty. It's almost impossible not to be. They even said that once a student set their hair on fire because they were just too busy looking at Zoya. So I can only imagine how Nikolai's faring having to see her every single day. Then Audric tells Nina that he was in love with her too because she was the only person who didn't treat him any differently after he lost his arm. Just talking about what happened to Audric's arm leads both of them to talk about the Civil War. They were both pretty much children when it happened, but Audric was the one who talked his sister and Alina into letting him stay with that main group from the first books. But that wasn't the case with Nina. She was one of the kids who stayed at the Grisha school while all this craziness was going on. And it took until me reading this to realize that that means she was one of the kids who was held hostage by the Darkling. And Audric is like, yeah, I couldn't have lived with that guilt if you guys would have all died and I would have lived. And even though this conversation turns a little bit more lighthearted, Nina starts to reflect on her own guilt that brought her here. She often wondered why she survived so much. There was a Driscoll capture and then them putting her on the ship, and then that ship wrecked. Then that led her, to joining Kaz's gang and going on all of those crazy heists, especially, the big heist at the ice court. And on top of all of that stuff, she's the only Grisha that we know of who actually survived the addiction to Parem. And all of these doubts are going on in her mind. What could have even made it possible? Was it the specific strain of Parem? I only lived to spite Jarl Broom? Was it chance or fortune or fate? Or was it even just Matthias's sheer will just keeping her to this living world? And then she starts to have the conversation in her head with Matthias. She feels like a failure, but he tells her that just by living, she's not failing him at all. This whole chapter just made me so emotional because, like I mentioned before, they are my favorite couple. They are
a one true pair,
as they say these days. I love Nina. The fact that she's doubting, why she's even still around anymore is just heartbreaking. And Matthias, again says, I will find a way to protect you. And his voice is getting louder and clearer, and Nina thinks it's because they're finally getting ready to part. And she wishes that Inej was with her. She misses her silence and her friendship. She knew Matthias, Audric didn't even know him at all. And it's just sad that Nina is the only one that's there to lay him to rest. But before they even bury Matthias, they set up camp first and get a fire going. And they're sitting around this fire, drinking some pretty shitty liquor, I guess. Audric says, you never told me about how Matthias died. But since no one really knew about this heist that led to his death, she kind of has to, emit a lot of things about what led to his death. She just says they were working on a mission in Ketterdam. It got really crazy afterwards. And, they thought that they finally made it and that everyone was safe. But then Matthias showed up bleeding. She has an idea about what could have happened, but, there were not only Driscoll in the city who were after him, but they all had a price on their head at this point. And she knows that Matthias wouldn't tell her who did it because he knew that she would strike out in grief and in anger, and it wouldn't have ended up well. I'm sure she would have regretted acting out if she actually did find out who killed Matthias, but the mystery of it almost feels like more of a punishment to her. And this is actually really relatable to Audric. He tells her that at the end of the war, all he wanted was revenge from the Darkling for taking his arm, for killing his friends. He just wanted him dead. Though he got his wish, he says that his arm didn't grow back and that his friends didn't come back from the dead. And he kind of relieves the tension by saying, hey, I could, help you out with that if you wanted to. I can only imagine how weird Nina's new powers are to her still. She said that she used to be a heartrender, so she used to feel the living pulse of the world. She felt it beating alongside her own heart, and now she just deals with everything that's
dead.
And not only do the dead do her bidding now, but since these voices are in her head telling her where to go, she finds herself doing the bidding of the dead. So it's finally time to bury Matthias, and Nina comes across the spot and she knows it's the perfect place to put him to rest. She actually asks Matthias for another one of his stories, but he ends up asking her for one instead. And he asks her about her childhood, which we didn't learn about in Crooked Kingdom or Six of Crows. So there were actually no record of Nina's parents. At this time in Ravka, it was just, even more of a mess than it is now, so there were a lot of orphaned children around. We found that out with Mal and Alina. Even when she got to this orphanage, she was already a really happy child. She greeted all of the new orphans that came in. She even offered them her doll for comfort if they needed it on the first night. Even all of the staff adored her too. How do you not love Nina instantly? Because I sure know I did. But when she was 7, she had her first real ordeal with what she calls a tyrant. And his name was Tomek. And basically he came in and started bullying everybody, and every kid that even kind of had a little bit of a mean streak in them just gravitated to him right away, and they formed this
awful group of children.
He wasn't even tall or strong, he was just the meanest of them all. And of course he put on this sweet face around the adults, and as soon as they left, he tortured the children. On the morning of one of the many festivals Ravka seems to have, one of the adults working at the orphanage actually gave Nina an orange and told her to be careful with it, to save it for the right time. But Nina was too excited about it, and Tomek saw this and took her orange, put it in his mouth, and just let all the juices run down his face. It was at this moment, though, that Nina felt the shift in her body, where her rage turned into power. All of the fear left her, and she's just standing there squeezing her hands, and then Tomek starts hiccuping. Hiccuping to the point where it's actually painful and he can't stop.
Just kind of what he deserved.
But our dear Nina doesn't just use her powers to, give Tomek his comeuppance. She finds out that she can actually use it on herself and soothe her stomach ache, or she can help soothe fussy babies. A few months after that, the Grisha examiners came, found out she had her powers, and she was thrilled. And one of the women that worked at Nina's orphanage actually told them that Nina is a married child and don't break her of that. And it would be really sad if Nina lost that part of her. Matthias tells her no one is ever going to take that from you. But she's worried that it's already gone, that Matthias's death leached this bit of happiness from her. So the spot that Nina picked to bury Matthias is by this nice little group of trees. It's near a riverbank, and it seems like the place where travelers would come and take a rest. And she said that the river even seems to rest at this spot too. And it took Nina hours to dig, and she wasn't even sure how far to dig, and Audric couldn't really give her much help. So when she finally thinks that she dug enough, she's exhausted, her hands are blistered, but she still made herself help Audric move Matthias's body to the grave. And he's wrapped in this special linen that fabricators made to slow down the decaying process. She's even tempted to move back the cloth and take a last look at him, but she knows he won't look the same. And it probably reminds her of when she tried to bring him back from the dead and how he just didn't look quite right. She wanted to remember him as he was when he was alive and she saw him last, and his hair was just starting to grow out and he was just looking handsome and his sweet usual self.
And I'm getting emotional!
She actually does make a comparison of Matthias to looking like a caterpillar and a chrysalis, like he's ready to become this beautiful butterfly and transform. Go on to a better place, hopefully.
I'm getting so sad!
At this moment, Nina realizes that they never even exchanged rings.
Which means like they wanted to be married.
They never exchanged any gifts. So Nina ends up putting in some of the tulips
that were left on his body in Ketterdam.
And on top of the petals that she put on his body, she actually leaves a handful of toffees.
Just like, hey, I know you don't like sweets, but when I see you again, we'll eat them. Save them for me.
So after she, gives him what little gifts she has with her, she starts putting the dirt on his body and just keeps saying,
I love you, I love you, I love you.
She obviously needs alone time in this moment.
And I feel like I need alone time right now too.
Nina gives this really beautiful, heartfelt eulogy. It's kind of a shame that there's no one else there to, hear it. She starts to at least feel like the first part of her debt to Matthias is done. She brought him back to the home that he loved, the country that he loved, where he wanted to be laid to rest with his God. And it was time to finally say goodbye. He's letting her know, keep listening to these voices in your head, keep listening to these women, and they're starting to talk up again, and they are demanding justice for what happened to them. This makes Nina realize this isn't madness, I'm not hallucinating. This new power of hers brought her here for a reason. But sadly, at the same time, her coming to this realization that the voices are real lets her know that Matthias's voice was not real. She knows he's truly gone, and she knows that he was never really there to begin with. So Nina was using Matthias's voice as a way to cope with her grief. And it's interesting to go back and look at what she's actually telling herself in Matthias's voice, because she's getting herself through it.
Too teary-eyed to even look at you guys right now.
So she tells Matthias goodbye. No one answers, and she's all alone.
And I can't handle it. This chapter just was so sad. It broke my heart.
The wolf didn't even show up. I really thought the wolf was going to show up at the end of this chapter when she was burying Matthias.
Didn't even get to have that. Can't have nice things in the Grishaverse. At least Nina can, you know.
Everyone else is seeming to get their happy endings. And
I want that for Nina.
And that is the end of chapter 8, a Nina chapter. Thanks, Leigh Bardugo, for just ripping my heart out one more time. What's the matter at this point?
When Matthias died, I stress ate tacos, like really bad.
Now I'm surrounded by my son's Valentine's candy, and I just want to eat it all.
Look what you made me do, Leigh Bardugo.
So please, join me for chapter 9, where hopefully we don't cry the entire time. For once, I'm actually ready for a break from Nina chapters, and I never even thought I'd say that.